as a hyper feminine woman, I find myself very specifically attracted to other hyper feminine women, and that is, oh, to the world, that's porn, or it's a publicity stunt, or I'm just out here trying to get attention from men specifically. You know, and like those things, really my own internalization of that and working through that.
Well, the complexities of what the world has lived through in the last number of years is just now being understood. Pandemic may have changed us all, especially in the LGBTQ plus community. And today's guest is an author, and it is a great segue to that thought. Choreographer, director, right here in Miami, Marissa Alma Nick founded Screen Dance Miami in 2013 and her own all-femme dance theater company, Alma Dance Theater, in 2015. She has just released a new book that is getting a lot of attention called Rebel in Venus. It's a story of confession, healing, and the connection spanning one girl's night in between two best friends. So welcome, Marissa Alma Nick. And before I start, I understand you're unapologetically queer.
Yes, I am very unapologetically queer.
You meet our theme of our interview segment. I imagine as a choreographer that you have lived for performance, and pandemic interrupted all of that. And I start there because my feeling is that that is an intersection of this new book that you have. Let's start there. Your experience as a dancer, choreographer, a dance company. Tell me about what it was like to go through a pandemic.
Oh, little PTSD.
For all of us.
For everybody,
right?
Yeah. I think it changed for everybody. It was interesting for me because right before 2020 hit, December 2019, I was performing in a show and my right meniscus tore while performing, which required immediate surgery and knowing it would take 6 to 9 months to recover. And then 2 weeks after that surgery, my best friend killed herself.
Oh dear.
And then 2 months later, the pandemic really set in. You know, there was whispers about it. And then by March, we were all at home. And so there was a lot of despondency on my part. I saw no way out. I think even before the pandemic, because those two events really hit me. And then there was the shutdown. So dancers weren't together in the studio. There was no production. Entertainment stopped. And so I started writing because I didn't know what was going to happen next. And I always crave an outlet as an artist. And I had been writing my whole life, but secretly to myself.
For yourself.
For myself.
And so if I understand it correctly, you know, and I've told this story similar to yours, different than yours, but similar to yours. We launched Queer News Tonight in January of 2020, and one of the very first stories we told in our nightly evening news show was this strange new virus that was being reported by World Health in China. And we were just reporting on the virus. And in 2 months, all hell literally broke loose. We continued to broadcast Queer News Tonight every evening, but we're not performing for an audience. And while some might say we're performing in a way, it's not like what you were doing in terms of performing in front of an audience, gathering with other dancers and other professionals. Was that ultimately then what I understand the inspiration of the book? The pandemic was the inspiration.
Forced isolation also. Just forced isolation. Between the pandemic and my leg. You know, I was on crutches for so long. Yeah. And it was the aha moment. Sort of.
It's interesting to me, however, because if you would have just had the injury, like I imagine most dancers in their career, you still have the look forward to know, well, but I'm going to get to this date and I'm going to be able to fill in the blank. In pandemic, we went through times where Ocean Drive, you're in South Beach, there's no cars. Yeah. There's nobody in bars or restaurants. And you wonder, is this literally the end of the world? There's no end game like your injury was. Yeah. So you're going through this process. What's going through your mind of, is this it?
It is. It brings on a weight of depression. I think when we lose certain securities, like in the world, like we never lived through a pandemic, right? We didn't know what that would bring. And I think we have certain comforts. We know what the next day is going to bring, and it gives us a sense of safety. And so for me, it felt like all of that was stripped. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. And everything was so new. It's incredibly overwhelming. So absolutely, that was a driving force in me trying to navigate through that so that I wouldn't honestly become somebody who would also lose myself to suicide, because it was really getting dark for me.
Did you consider it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a big driving point in the book as well. In order for me to navigate through things as an artist, this was parallel as a choreographer. And I feel like this is true for a lot of artists. I can make sense of it, but until I express it through some sort of artistic outlet, that's where things I can heal. I can see it.
You know, I've heard people say that for creative personality, artist, that it's like a virus or an infection, and until you can get it out of you to move on to the next thing, it's in you, and you suffer from it. And that's what I'm hearing you say that you went through.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, too, Rebel and Venus started as a show. So my company, the last show I was working on before pandemic hit, before my injury happened, was Rebel and Venus, the show, which came from, in 2018, I was going through healing my own sexual traumas and in therapy. And so I was bringing that into the studio, and that trickled into this show that was the dancers and I having this conversation about trying to understand our own, I'm going to say, Me Too moments, and finding this community, the strength in community. And it's scary to sort of uncover that by yourself, but when you have somebody sit across from you and say, that actually happened to me too, it's not just you, there was so much strength in that. And so that's where the piece started to grow from as a live show. Then the knee happened and the pandemic happened, and I didn't know when we were even going to be in a studio again. So I had started this idea as a stage show, and I do take my time. I work on shows for about a couple years. So I had just started to crack that nut open, and then the shutdown happened. So I had also these themes running through me that I wasn't finished getting it out. And that theme of the camaraderie and this connection through each other and saying, this happened to me too, that was also this driving force that stayed very present in the book. The idea of this conversation between the two best friends that goes on all night long.
I want to dive into, in a moment, this relationship between the two best friends. But I want to start broader. One of the big themes of the book that so many people have talked about is something that we've explored at Queerness Tonight a lot over the last 3 years. During pandemic especially, but really post-pandemic, of us beginning to digest what happened to us. And that is mental health and the risk to our mental health. That, as I understand it, is a big key component to your book. Tell us about the mental health aspect of Rebels and Venus.
So in full transparency and in all vulnerability, my best friend, one of the thing in her note, she left a note, and it was so short, the one I lost to suicide, and it said, I don't want to be a burden to my friends and family anymore. And that really hit me. And so while writing this book, I kept thinking of her, and I said, what if I wrote a book that she would read, and instead of seeing herself as a burden, she would see herself as a hero? And so that was really moving to me, because myself as well, I was suffering with so much shame and feeling like I'm never going to not feel like this, or I wish all these things didn't happen to me, or I can't wake up like this again. Maybe if I was different, it would be better. And so I wanted to write this story of people who suffer from depression and anxiety, maybe even thoughts of suicide and trauma that hasn't been dealt with. And instead of seeing themselves as a burden, or that they have to be something else to be a hero, that experience and them facing that and the journey of that makes them the hero itself. So that was, and that's in the dedication. It says, to the girls and anybody daring to live a life free of shame. And that's also, I think, a lot of with mental health and these darker, more complex and nuanced thoughts that are difficult to talk about. There is that pressure of shame. And so I wanted to write a hero's journey for those of us who suffer with depression and issues of mental health.
Yeah. And to that specific issue, depression and anxiety is a universal thing that it's not just women, it's not just queer women, it's not just gay guys, it's not just trans, it's not just straight, it's not just any one thing. We all suffer from anxiety and depression, either forced on us by peers or forced on us by our own thinking process. When you're exploring this, was it was it therapeutic for you in terms of going through the story of what you went through as a dancer, as a creative professional and artist, the loss of your friend, the injury, pandemic being forced on you? Was the process of writing one of the ways that you were able to deal with depression and anxiety?
Absolutely. I even had like a third coming out in the process of my own sexuality, because a lot of times, at least in my experience as a woman and a queer woman, you get met with, you must be gay because something happened to you, or what man hurt you for you to be gay. This is a lot of an assumption that comes for women in the gay community. And so in this book, I really wanted to give myself permission to separate the two. So Layla, the main character, is very queer, but it's not written in a way that that's the shame and that's the trauma. And that was really important for a message to myself and to other people reading it, whether they're queer or not, is that your queerness, your gayness, that's not the trauma. Mm-hmm. That's not the mental health issue. That's mm-hmm. not the thing that needs your attention and your care and this process that's asking you to heal something. So that was really empowering also for me, because in my own ways, I've carried around this weight of shame behind my own sexuality, or having to over-explain it or separate the two. Like, yes, I have sexual trauma, but yes, I'm also gay, and one doesn't have anything to do with the other, or sometimes they do. So yeah, it was it was such a therapeutic process. And I remember, like, at one point writing, I was still holding back, and I was like, in order for me to do this, I have to like make myself bleed on this paper, or it's not gonna
feel authentic.
Exactly.
Yeah. And interesting to me in terms of what I just heard you say, is this secretly somewhat an autobiography mm-hmm. of your life then?
Yes. Oh my gosh. There is a term that Audre Lorde has. It's like mythic. There's a term of what I've done, which is, it is inspired, it's autobiographical, but it still has its elements of fiction. And so for me, why I went in that direction, I mean, my process with writing, I think, isn't different from others. You don't like, here's my idea and I'm going to write it exactly as is. It's sort of, you go for it and it becomes what it's going to be as it's being written. So for me, as it started to make sense and I was putting so much of my own story into it, I still wanted this creative freedom, because the story of Layla was also happening, which if I would have to commit my whole story to Layla's, it would have not been cohesive. It wouldn't have made sense. So in order to honor the narrative of where Layla's story was going, I wanted to give myself that creative liberty to tell the narrative the way that I felt it needed to be told, while allowing the full inspiration from my own experiences to come into that.
You know, it gives us an excellent opportunity. We take every opportunity we can to help shine a light on all of the variety of representation in our LGBTQ community. The old joke is the white gay guys take up all the in the room. And sometimes that can be true. In this instance, it gives us a unique opportunity to focus on the two girl best friends. One of the things I want to come back to is the observation that you made about the reason to be a lesbian or a queer woman. I have read so much, especially from more difficult aspects of society, that have written that lesbian and queer women are principally propelled because of some kind of harm from men. And that's why they're lesbian and queer women. What do you think about those words that are written? Because that certainly could be at play in this story.
Oh yeah, it's it inspired the direction of which I took this as well. It's so upsetting because I've been asked that for my whole life as well, because it dehumanizes my own experience as a queer woman, as if my queerness and my gayness doesn't exist without this patriarchal, heteronormative idea of what I'm supposed to be, especially because I present more hyper-feminine and my body is shaped the way it is. There's all these pressured expectations of who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to act. Even within the gay community, I might be assumed to be with a woman who's maybe more masculine presenting. All these types of weird boxes that we feel comfortable putting each other into. It's definitely already inspiring the topic for my next book, where I found this in Layla and Maria, who the two best friends that you're talking about. You know, there's this night that they're talking about everything, and Layla is bringing up stories from her past and sharing them with her friend. And woven in and out of that are very queer stories that she experiences. But there's never this, and it was intentional, there's never this moment where Layla's like, I think I'm gay. You know, her first moment of being attracted to a girl, she doesn't even overthink it. It just happens. And it's the story of her first kiss and what happens post the first kiss, of course. And all the way up until her marriage and divorce. I wanted to give her this fluid experience of sexuality where she feels like she doesn't have to over-explain it to her best friend, who I also intentionally wrote as a pretty straight girl. It's pretty clear that Maria, her best friend, is a straight woman. So I also wanted to show that there can be this bridge that we can cross and come together also to feel the acceptance beyond just our own community. How can I talk openly about my sexuality to my best friend who's not also gay? Can she hold space for me? Is that okay for me? So I wanted to give that to Layla and Maria, because I've always, in my own experiences, sort of put up walls and barriers because, you know, I'm scared of what someone's going to think or assume about me. So it was like probably the most fictional part of the book was that, where there is no this shame. Layla doesn't have shame about her queerness. It's the one thing she doesn't have shame about. And I wanted to give that to her to really highlight that the things that are eating up at her is this abuse and sexual trauma that she's never dealt with, not her gayness.
Yeah, and in that stereotype, let's dismiss outside our community for a moment. We can assume that stereotype of why lesbian and queer women exist is because of sexual trauma, and let's just reject, or let's separate ourselves from that. I'm curious in terms of what you just said inside the LGBTQ community, because I hear you say, wait, we rush to put ourselves in these boxes. Your representation of what somebody in our community would think about you and who you would be and how you present and represent in community. Why does the LGBTQ community, do you think, in the exploration of this book, why do you think we do that to ourselves? What's behind it?
For me, I think it's these fed ideas. I mean, it goes back to heteronormativity that's really fed to us. So in my own experience, as a gay woman and my trajectory of coming out, what I've always had to battle is the images of a female and a male being side by side. And so my experience within, especially the female queer community, it was difficult I came out also, so I'm 38, and my coming out started to happen between high school and college. This is the early 2000s. You know, the famous gay woman was Ellen. So there was a really specific ideal about what a gay woman looked like, how she was supposed to present. And then if you're feminine, you're supposed to be with somebody that looks like Ellen. There was all these fed messages. And I feel like that comes from our fear also, like maybe an internalized homophobia even, because we're so concerned with, not concerned, it makes sense. Like we're traumatized with being oppressed and dehumanized and told we're not good enough. There's something wrong with us. We have to fit into this box. And so it's like the next step of, well, I'm going to accept who I am, but I still feel like I have to prove myself in this world. That's why, I thought the movie Tar was a brilliant explanation of that. Like a lesbian who feels so, she's so, inside her head, she can't get past where she's competing with her male counterparts, her heterosexual white male counterparts. And so it's almost like she can't get past that. And so she feels like she has to not only just dress like them, but act in these very even like predatory ways, because that is how straight men act.
In a way of toxic masculinity,
right,
even though she is a queer woman.
Yeah, and it's so these things are so embedded in us in different ways. And I know for myself, my own, like how I said, I feel like I just went through this. My third coming out is because I always felt so ashamed, because again, as a hyper feminine woman, I find myself very specifically attracted to other hyper feminine women, and that is, to the world, that's porn, or it's a publicity stunt, or I'm just out here trying to get attention from men specifically. You know, and like those things really, my own internalization of that and working through that. Even coming from a household where it was so easy to tell my parents I was gay, I had gay cousins, gay uncles, I had that benefit. And yet still the world is so powerful with the messages we're sending to each other that it took me decades to still unravel that.
You know, that's fascinating. And the example that you give about Ellen DeGeneres is so fascinating to me because my observation on Ellen, completely different than your digestion of Ellen, Portia de Rossi is completely different than Ellen, and so little is ever focused on her, and Ellen is the more dominant, more, you know, and maybe that's our internalized homophobia right from the very beginning. One thing that you mentioned here that I want to ask about in relation to the book and these two characters, we remind our audience this book is on the relationship of two women friends in the course of a single evening. The entire narrative of the book is on that single evening. The phrase femme is used a lot in connection with the story and the book. Is that a phrase that you're comfortable with as a lesbian queer woman? Femme, is that a phrase that you go, yeah, that's a right word?
For me, absolutely. Even my company, Alma Dance Theater, it's a femme-centric female company. You know, femme-centric is a thing I've really learned to own. And it's taken me a while because a lot of times femme people think of like femme, bimbo, ditzy, lesser than, unintelligent, like not powerful. Has to be apologetic even. And so it's been a fun re-owning that term. I love it. I'll take it. I wear my crown. Super femme. Yeah. Very femme.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to also touch on the Alma Dance Theater and your injury. First off, are you going to come back to dance?
Yes, and I don't know when, because I've actually had in the last, as this book was coming out, 4 surgeries total on my knee. Yeah, and it's 1 on the right and it's been 3 on the left. And it's funny, like I do feel like this has been a weird blessing in disguise because I wrote the book for the 2 years it took me, but I was still coming back to dancing and putting on shows. I was really scared to put the book out because the world knows me as a dancer. A femme dancer who can count to 8. You mean she writes and reads? What are we talking about? So I had, again, these internalized fears for myself. So then, again, while performing... Clearly,
she's smart.
Yes.
Right, and reads. And maybe that's not an image that you want to project, maybe.
Right, yeah, no. So then in my left knee, then my left meniscus tore while performing, and it really felt like the universe being like, sit down, literally again, and let's put this book out. And it sort of helped me conquer my fears in the end. So honestly, having 2 meniscus tears while performing as a dancer, and I've been a professional dancer my whole life, I honestly thought I was invincible. I would move my body without fear that something could happen to me. And that's, you athletes and dancers, you don't think about getting injured in the moment. But it has happened to me twice while performing, and it has had its own traumatic effect. I just had my final surgery 2 months ago on my left knee. So I've just gotten out of crutches, I hope, for the last time on and off the last 3 years. And I need to give myself time to not just physically heal from that, but mentally heal from that. So I really am embracing where I am right now as an artist. I've even felt, you know, I've started writing again. And I think I've wanted to write for so long, but I haven't. So I'm taking all this downtime as a dancer and very much welcoming it. I don't find myself being called into the dance studio. Not for a long time, I don't see it. It's like, and that's also another beautiful thing. I'm giving myself permission to, that's where I am now.
Yeah, you know, for whatever it's worth, the genius, the writing of the original story content of Jurassic Park was a book long before it was a movie. And the genius behind that book is life will find a way, which is the theme that runs all through it. And as I listen to you speak, your evolution is exactly that same thing. This door closed, a new creative door opened, and you're pursuing it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting to me, Rebel in Venus, and this theme about two women and their experience through the evening together and discussing where they're at and issues of mental health and self-shaming and other kinds of things. One of the characters you've explained is identified as lesbian. One of the characters is not. From your seat as you're writing that book, and you're commenting kind of in an autobiographical fashion of yourself, tell us how you think the lesbian and queer women in our community, how are they doing today?
I think more thriving than surviving, but we still get caught up in surviving, which is normal. You know, I love seeing on Instagram, you know, what is it called? Oh, there's all these accounts that I follow of women getting married, and, you know, I'm like, you know, seeing that on my phone is very inspiring and open. But I still do think, so I see that, like, and that's a very general idea. So that's where I think that we're learning to thrive in the world, and yet we still have to think about surviving on a daily basis. You know, I was telling my mom, I hate when I go out to the bars, all these men hit on me. I want a woman to hit on me, for example. She's like, well, just tell him, you know, you're lesbian, to back off. And I was like, that's so scary, because what if he's drank too much? What if he takes it as being offended? What if he is very non-liberal, right? What are his ideas about homosexuality? So what's his response going to be? And so even thinking about that, walking down the street with my girlfriend, depending on what city we're in, is it okay to hold hands? You know, and I follow those blogs on TikTok, like places to travel safely as a lesbian. And I assume this also goes for men, but I know, like, physically, stature-wise, we don't have that. You know,
we'll fight.
Yeah, there's only a person who is so much larger than me versus me, and all my spunk, you know, is still potentially not going to be an even fight. And so I'm so proud and happy that we are learning, like, we are in this thriving era, but we still do have to survive. And I think these conversations, our activism, artists putting out gay art, you know, I know that I was met with, even with this book, are you sure you want to just gear it towards just the queer, gay, you know, lesbian community, because that's going to segment you? And even that's a a moment where I have to decide, is that me surviving or thriving? What's best for me? What's best for the community? Mm-hmm. So I think we're in that middle.
It seems to me, however, Rebel in Venus is much more complex than a queer story. It's about a story of how we survive isolation and the mental health issues that are placed upon us in various ways. Pandemic is just one illustration of many things that are placed upon us and how we deal with it. And the ultimate choice, do we come to the conclusion that your friend in real life came to, or do we come to the conclusion that you considered but survived?
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, what the book is all about. I'm curious, in terms of Rebel in Venus, a publisher identifies the lane that the book might be classified. How would gay men approach this book, or what would you want gay men to think about as they approach Rebel in Venus?
Well, one of my best friends is a gay man and a white gay man. And I've had a lot of conversations with him. And so I think, just like with any other man, gay or not, you know, the female experience in America is so specific, whether you're gay or not. And we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it at all. It's almost too overwhelming. We just started talking about it in 2018. And so how you talk about also the power of these friendships, I feel like I wanted to inspire the power of vulnerable conversation. We can all sit at a table and you have such a different life experience than mine. And I want to tell you about my life experience so that you can understand me more. And I want to hear about yours so I can understand you more. And now I know how to support you. You know how to support me. We've now created a bridge for one another. And so that's completely what I hope for a gay man, a straight man, a woman who's not gay, a person who doesn't struggle with depression. You know, I want these people to read the book and not, if they don't see themselves in Layla, to develop empathy for someone like Layla. And I guarantee If it's not them, it's a close friend or family member, especially speaking on the mental health issues. I think that is our epidemic in America is mental health and suicide. It's terrifyingly prevalent. And it's terrifyingly prevalent in teen girls. So that's probably like the nearest and dearest thing to me, because it's heartbreaking to know that that's all that women, that some people are seeing at the end. And so that isolation feeling is usually the last thing that clicks for somebody. Nobody's going to understand me. And so part of that is, how do we break through our own self-inflicted isolation? You know, what's going to happen if I share my truth with somebody? And that is scary. So I wanted to inspire like a best case scenario. You know, these two best friends. What happens if she spills everything to her? Like, what's going to happen at the end of that?
Beautifully said. We remind audience to the importance of what Marissa just said. Studies show, and we've reported on it extensively at Queerness tonight, if you're an LGBT teen, for just as example, you are twice as likely to commit suicide. You're 4 times as likely to think about suicide as your straight counterparts as a teenager in the United States. And a full 50% of all trans teenagers have thought about suicide in the last 12 months. We encourage you, as you're listening to Marissa, you read this book, Rebel in Venus. There's resources out there for you. There is an easy phone number hotline, and there is the Trevor Project and many others that can help you, because your life is worthwhile. One other note, Marissa, and I just point this out. It's very interesting to me of how important a book like this, and you're discussing the importance of a book like this would be, because you are a choreographer and a dancer, and principally have identified yourself this way. But in writing this book and discussing this book, you may be the most valuable for yourself and our community, which becomes activist. And if we're going to survive a governor, presidential candidate, we need to show that we're everything to everyone. And you're an additional revelation of that. The book, best place, where would you recommend we get Rebel in Venus?
Amazon is probably the easiest. And I'm just starting to get into local bookstores. So, you know, I'm getting it into a couple in Miami, Books and Books, Blue Stockings if you're in Soho in New York. I've been actually targeting specifically feminist and queer bookstores in America, because that's a dwindling, you know, bookstores are dwindling. So if I was going to target them, I wanted to target specific ones. But distribution does take time, and the book's only been out 3 months. So if you want it today, go on Amazon.
Yeah,
it's there for you.
Amazon has made our life easy, and for sure for Marissa and Rebel in Venus. We invite you, learn a lot more about Marissa Alma Nick and this interesting new book, Rebel in Venus, and get more information. And it's really simple. Go to the website, rebelinvenus.com. Lots of social media for Marissa. And we have the benefit of you right here in South Florida. So we want to make sure that you are not a stranger. And Marissa, I want to thank you so much. All the luck of this new project and the transition. It seems like to me, my feeling reaction of this first opportunity and getting to know you, you were challenged, you survived, and now you're beginning to thrive. And isn't that what we all want?
Yes.
Our community. Thank you so much, Marissa Alma Nick, for joining us on Unapologetically Queer.
Thank you.